Good evening. You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Ladies and gentlemen, we need several things. Number one, we need to know how many of you would be serious about participating in a march on Washington in September of this year. We're letting you know in plenty of time to save money, make plans for time off, and to prepare whatever you have to prepare to be able to do it. If we don't hear from a lot of you, we're not going to waste our time because we don't have any time to waste. We're about serious business. So, if you're about serious business and you would like to help us make some changes for the better in this country, I want you to drop a letter or a postcard telling us that you're willing to participate in a march in September. And don't say that you will unless you really will. And send it to the Constitution Party, Post Office Box 330. I forgot the box number. P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. That's the Constitution Party. P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. Please do that. In fact, don't address it to the Constitution Party, folks. Address it to me, William Cooper. Send it to William Cooper, P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. That's because I want to take a look and see just exactly. I want to do it myself. I want to see how many of you are serious about helping turn this country around. Also, the newspaper is being typeset and laid out as I speak, and will soon be in the mail to all of you who are charter subscribers. If you would like to subscribe to our newspaper, Veritas, it's a full-size newspaper, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a tabloid like the Spotlight, and it's not a newsletter like a lot of the things that you're getting now. It's a full-size newspaper. A copy will be sent free gratis to every congressman, every senator, every governor of every state, and a few other people. The name of the paper is Veritas, V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. If you'd like to subscribe, send $50 for 24 issues to Veritas, V-E-R-I-T-A-S, P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. Now remember, make checks or money orders out to Veritas. If you make them out to anybody else, they will be returned to you. And I'm not kidding. They really will. They'll be returned to you because we won't be able to use them. We prefer money orders. Checks are fine. Gold or silver coin is even better. Don't go away, folks. In just a few moments, our special guest for tonight, Dr. Gene Schroeder, will be here to talk about some very important history and some very important present, which he and I both have been a part of, and some very important future. Don't go away. Don't you dare miss a word.
Welcome to the New World Order. Never in human history has so few taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and their warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've exported your jobs and surrendered our arms. They want a new world order. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. The Illuminati wants you to be a slave from birth to grave. The banksters own the Federal Reserve. It's private. They own it. It's neither federal nor a reserve. The cashiers make that fiat funny money stuff you call dollars for 2 pennies. They lend it back to us at full face value. Then charge you interest. You get the debt. They get the interest. They get the gold. You get the cash.
Yes, they want it all. Welcome to the Hour of the Time, Mr. Gene Schroeder.
Bill, with great respect, it's my pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's a great honor to have you with us tonight. Everybody out there is certainly waiting to hear what you have to say. So without further ado, why don't you give us a little background about who you are and then just go right into the history of how we got where we're at and do your thing. You do it so well.
Bill, a little history. I'm a doctor of veterinary medicine. Born and raised in Campo, Colorado, a small town in southeastern Colorado. Also farmer rancher, have been all my life. Back in the late 70s, 1977, we realized that the federal government had total control of everything we do as farmers and ranchers in this nation. And we realized that under that total authoritarian control of government, under that planned agenda, that the family farms were being eliminated from the farms. So back many years ago, we knew that we had to take a stand, that unless we done something, that there would be no family farms left in this country. That's how we became involved. Beginning to study how did the federal government obtain this kind of control over us. Obviously, the Constitution did not allow for a federal government of this magnitude. That the Constitution did not allow a federal government to have a police power within the states, within the bodies of the counties of the states. And yet it was obvious that they were doing it and had been doing it for many years. That I was born in 1947, and that's all I knew was government control over agriculture. So as a result, that's how we became involved. That's how we began our study of what was going wrong. It took us several years to finally come to the realization that this country was operating as a war government under the war powers, and that under those conditions, the Constitution of this United States is effectively set aside. And the government can, in fact, and has, in fact, taken total authoritarian control over everything that we do, not only in agriculture, but in all other aspects and all other areas as well.
Now, we can trace this back to a specific time in our history, and that's shortly after of course, the passage of the Federal Reserve Act and the War Powers Act of 1917, and then the economic collapse, which certainly came out of the establishment of the central bank and the control of our money supply by private concerns. And then the steps that the newly elected President Roosevelt took in bringing this so-called emergency under control. This all actually really got rolling in 1933. Is that correct?
Yes, it did. And let me read just a little bit from the congressional record there in 1933. This is Congressman James Beck. And he says, I think of all the damnable heresies that have ever been suggested in connection with the Constitution, the doctrine of emergency is the worst. It means that when Congress declares an emergency, there is no Constitution. This means it's death. He goes on and says that it's the very doctrine that the German Chancellor was using at that time. Remember, this is 1933.
That's correct.
That this is the same powers that Chancellor Hitler used to take over Germany, Weimar Germany. That was Article 48 of that Weimar Constitution, the emergency powers that were allowed there. And that under these powers, there is no Constitution. That means it's death. Now let me read just a little bit from Senate Report 93-549, just to make the case. This is our senator speaking to us. This is done in 1973. It says, since March the 9th of 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. It says, this vast range of powers taken together confer enough authority to rule this country without reference to normal constitutional processes. It says, under the powers delegated to these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways control the lives of all American citizens.
Now, you said whenever Congress does this, but in fact, it's the President who has been declaring the national emergency in every administration since 1933.
Yes, that's absolutely the case. If we go, if we realize that what Congress told us there in 1973 was true, and that we had in fact lived all of our lives under emergency rule, with the Constitution under suspension, that then we can go to see where that authority and how that came into effect. And let's read the current law of today. Let's go to Title 12 U.S.C. Section 95B, and let's see who and how it is that this government is really being operated. I'll read it. It's very short. It says, the actions, regulations, rules, license, orders, and proclamations heretofore or hereafter taken, promulgated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury since March the 4th of 1933, pursuant to the authority conferred by Subdivision B of Section 5 of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, as amended, are hereby approved and confirmed. That current law that's in the law books today in Title 12 U.S.C. is cited at March the 9th of 1933, Chapter 1, Title 1, Section 1 of 48, Statute 1. Now, Bill, who does that say is ruling this country?
Well, it's obvious that there's a dictatorship run by the powers behind the President.
That's right, and that's called a dictatorship. In this fact, in this case, not a constitutional, but an unconstitutional dictatorship. And it says that every order that's been issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury since March the 4th of 1933 is automatically approved and confirmed. This is the power that goes to the executive branch of government to rule this country by order.
Now, you're not talking about something that happened a long time. You're talking about current law, and you just read it right out of the United States Code.
Yes, that's the current law of today. And it says that every executive order that's been issued since March the 4th, 1933, or any executive order that's going to be issued in the future is automatically approved and confirmed.
Now, how could they do that, Gene? And I'm asking questions in place of the radio audience asking them, because I have to ask the questions that they're obviously not able to ask.
Well, it says in the current law that it's being done under this authority that was conferred by subsection B of Section 5 of this Act of October the 6th, 1917. Now, Bill, we have to realize that in 1917, this country entered World War I. That's when we went into the war. And on October the 6th of 1917, our government realized, remember, we went to war with Germany for the first time.
That's correct.
And they realized that there were enemies of the United States living within the continental shelves of the United States, primarily German citizens and citizens of the Allies who were allied to Germany at that time. So as a result, our government and our Congress passed an act. It was called an Act to Define, Regulate, and Punish Trading with the Enemy. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
What this act fundamentally said was that everything that enemies do in this country, if they're within the jurisdiction of the United States, that the president will have total authoritarian power over enemies. That he has the power to issue any license, any order, any regulation to govern what enemies do. That he could control everything that they've done. At Section 5B of that Act, under which the current law says the power is being derived, it says that the President may investigate, regulate, or prohibit, under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe by means of license or otherwise, any transaction in foreign exchange, the export or earmarking of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency, transfers of credit in any form. But then it says, other than credits relating solely to transactions to be executed wholly within the United States. So you see that the President, under this Act, could control enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But under the definition of the word enemies, citizens of the United States were excluded from the provisions of this Act. Realizing that the citizens of this country were not enemies of the United States, therefore, this government and this President did not have those kind of powers over we the people. And also at Section 5B, it specifically excluded the transactions that were to be executed wholly within the United States. Therefore, the citizens' transactions that were wholly domestic transactions were not involved in the powers of this Act. They only applied over enemies. Okay? That's a critical concept that we have to realize. But now we know that Senate Report 93-549, from which we just read, said that this country, since March the 9th of 1933, had been in a state of declared national emergency.
Mm-hmm.
If we go then to the Act of March the 9th, but before we go to that Act of March the 9th, let's read just a little bit from Roosevelt's inaugural address. Okay, Roosevelt, when he was inaugurated on March the 4th, and of course we know the current law says that all the proclamations since March the 4th of 33 are approved and confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Roosevelt was inaugurated on March the 4th, and we know that in his inaugural address, we probably all remember from our history that he made the speech that says, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself."
Right. He also, didn't he ask for the powers to wage war against the emergency?
Let me read from his inaugural address. He says, "I am prepared under my constitutional duty to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. These measures or such other measures as the Congress may build out of its experience and wisdom I shall seek within my constitutional authority to bring to speedy adoption. But in the event that the Congress shall fail to take one of these two courses, and in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis, broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency, as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe." So you see that Roosevelt on March the 4th announces to the world that he is going to ask for this broad executive power to wage war, just as great as if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. Well, as it turns out, we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. We were invaded by a foreign conquering power that came over us. That power was confirmed on March the 9th of 1933.
Mm-hmm.
This is critically important.
Now, who was the enemy?
Now, we know that under the Act of October the 6th, 1917, that we were not the enemy, that we were specifically excluded. But Section 2 of this Act of March the 9th of 1933, which is now codified at 48 Statute 1, which is the current law of today, says that Subdivision B of Section 5 of the Act of October the 6th, 1917, as amended, is hereby amended to read as follows. Now listen to the language as it's now permanently codified today. It says that during times of war or during any other period of national emergency declared by the President may, through any agency that he may designate or otherwise, investigate, regulate, or prohibit under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe by means of license or otherwise, any transactions in foreign exchange, transfers of credit between or payments by banking institutions as defined by the President, and the export, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency, by any person within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
So the enemy has now changed.
That's right. The definition of the word enemy has now changed.
And it
now applies to every person within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The American people, under this amended act of March the 9th of 1933, have just been declared the same, given the same legal status as an enemy of the United States. We were, in fact, invaded by a foreign foe. This foreign foe that invaded us was our own Congress and our own President. When they changed the definition and made the people of the United States the enemy of the United States.
Now, they didn't just do this to play games, and they certainly didn't do it to make themselves rich, because none of them benefited all that much from what they did. So there must be a hidden agenda here.
Well, absolutely. That we did have a hidden agenda. And the thing, I think, to get to that hidden agenda, we have to go back and see who it was that wrote this act, who in reality had done the language. If we go back before March the 9th, we know that it says that all the regulations, rules, licenses, and orders that are issued since March the 4th. Well, on March the 5th, Roosevelt called for an extraordinary session of Congress to convene. He said we have a national emergency. This Congress was to convene on March the 9th of 1933 at noon. This is the act they passed there on March the 9th. Well, on March the 6th, Roosevelt issued an executive order without Congress's approval, because Congress was not even in session. He done it as an absolute dictator, as an executive dictator. And he issued an order that said fundamentally that under the powers of October the 6th, 1917, that he had the power over all transactions and all banking institutions in this country. And under that executive order, 2039, he closed and seized the banks of this country and seized all the people's lawful gold and silver coin money. He done that as an executive dictator. But now if we go back and see who wrote that act, we can go back to March the 3rd of 1933, which was prior to Roosevelt being inaugurated. And we find in Hoover's papers that this same executive order was proposed to Hoover. It was proposed by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who in fact had written the executive order word for word as Roosevelt introduced it as his executive order. Hoover declined to issue the executive order, saying that it was neither warranted or necessary. But Roosevelt, on March the 4th, in his inaugural address, announced to the world that he was going to use the war powers. That was the part we just read. He had already seen the executive order and, in fact, had worked with the Federal Reserve Board as early as February of 1933 to write that executive order. When he became president on March the 4th of 1933, he announced he would use this war power. On March the 6th, he instituted this executive order exactly as written by the Federal Reserve Board of New York. Now, why is it that the Federal Reserve Board would be issuing and writing this executive order for some president, whether it be Hoover or Roosevelt, to introduce? The reason was this, that the people had begun to line up at the banks, demanding their gold coin. Now, remember, in 1933, under the war powers, the Federal Reserve Act was first implemented, which allowed for the Federal Reserve banks to issue Federal Reserve notes upon the deposits of the assets of the people, which was the gold. But those Federal Reserve notes were redeemable in gold at face value. So consequently, prior to 1933, the people took their gold into the Federal Reserve banks and placed it on deposit. The Federal Reserve banks, in turn, gave them a note that said, anytime you want your gold, bring the note back to the bank and we will return your gold to you. In March of 1933, the people were lined up at the banks with their notes demanding their gold. The Federal Reserve banks did not have the gold. They had already shipped most of the gold out of the country. So consequently, they were caught in their own acts.
And they had compounded this error by performing what we call fractional reserve lending anyway.
Yes, they had. They had issued literally hundreds of times more notes than they had gold in reserve to serve as the obligations upon them notes.
So even if they had not shipped a good portion of the gold out of the country, they still would have been in big trouble.
Deep, deep trouble. And they knew that. So consequently, they issued this executive order asking for military protection from the people themselves because they were caught in an act of theft.
So in fact, to the Federal Reserve, the people really were the enemy.
Yes, they were. Absolutely. To the Federal Reserve and to this foreign international power, because remember that the Federal Reserve banks had already entered into international agreements with the other foreign nations, or with many of the foreign nations of the world, to use the gold in the settlement of international transactions. That the gold was not here. They had already formed into international alliances with these other countries.
Mm-hmm.
So when the people came to the banks wanting their money, as was required under those notes, they didn't have it and they were caught.
Now, the real hidden agenda here, which is the reason for the international alliance and the real reason for the machinations that are aimed at the dissolution of the economy and the sovereignty of the United States, is something even deeper and more all-pervasive than that people are beginning to see in their daily life today, and that's world government.
Yes, it was. And it was beginning, and it began back under the League of Nations, back under Wilson, under World War I, at the same time these other acts came on board. So consequently, our country had entered into these alliances with the other countries under this League of Nations. And now the whole thing was brought to a head because the people were demanding the gold in this country. As a result, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York proposed this executive order. Hoover declined to issue it, but on March the 6th of 1933, Roosevelt issued this executive order exactly as written by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It was a banker's executive order. The president was acting as an agent for the international banks. It was a foreign power. It was, in fact, a foreign invasion. That foreign invasion won that war. The people were in desperate straits. There were desperate needs. I guess they would have followed anybody at that time. But as a result, we did not mount a substantive attack upon that foreign invasion. But we sat back and we allowed it to happen. Probably mostly out of ignorance and out of desperation. But irregardless, we sat back and allowed that form of government to come over us. It was an international power under the law of nations. If we go to the memorandum of laws that attach to the Treating with the Enemy Act, we find that this is not the common law, that in fact it abolishes the common law of this country and it abolished our Constitution. And in fact, we went under the law of nations. It was part of the law of prize, the admiralty jurisdiction that came inland at that time, with that act.
And that has caused a plethora of snowball effects ever since.
Yes, it has.
It is, in fact, why some people can't understand. They call me and say, Bill, I was just in court, and I cited the Constitution, and I was told not to mention the Constitution in this court because it doesn't apply. And in fact, under this admiralty jurisdiction, it does not apply.
That's right. It does not apply. That under the form of government we're under today, that the Constitution has been effectively set aside and the common law was effectively set aside with it. Let me read just a couple of these cases. Number one, the American cases that pertain to this Trading with the Enemy Act. And remember, once we were declared to be the enemy, this is the laws that now pertain.
Okay. Why don't you just hold those until after the break? We've got to take a little break here and tend to business, and we'll come right back to this specific spot. So don't go away, folks. We'll be right back with Dr. Gene Schroeder, and I know you're sitting on the edge of your chairs just enthralled by all of this. He is elaborating on what you've been hearing on the Hour of the Time for a long, long period of broadcast, and is certainly reasserting many of the things that I've told you and the warnings that I've given you. And, of course, you're hearing a few new things that he has dug up in his own research, and you're going to hear a lot more, so don't go away.
Everybody knows with the fingers crossed. Everybody knows that the war is over. Everybody knows that the good guys lost. Everybody knows the fight is fit. The poor stay poor and the rich get rich. That's how it goes. Everybody knows the boat is sinking. Everybody knows that the captain lied. Everybody's heart is broken, feeling like their mama or the dog just died. Everybody's hands are in their pockets. Everybody wants a box of chocolates and a long stem rose. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. Everybody knows.
Yes, folks, everybody knows. Everywhere I go across this country, everyone I meet without fail tells me when we enter into a conversation that something is terribly wrong. They can feel it in their gut. It's not something that's mysterious hanging off over the horizon that nobody knows about. Everybody in this country and most people around the world know that something is happening and something is terribly wrong, and they want to know what it is. And a lot of them spend a lot of time dodging any type of responsibility that comes with that knowledge. Now, I've been illuminating you, so to speak, for a long, long time, along with many others. Dr. Gene Schroeder is one who has devoted a good portion of his life to try to wake the American sheeple. Now, if you have listened to even a portion of the message that we have been attempting to deliver to you, then you know that in the resolution of this conflict, whether we win or they win, it doesn't really, at this point in time, matter to you. What matters to you right now is that you prepare for this conflict, because it's going to come to a head. And there will be a conflict, and it will be either resolved in the field of words, across a Congress, in a legislative battle, trying to bring about the will of the people to restore government, or it'll be brought about on the battlefield with bullets. But it will be resolved, and there will be a winner. And you don't want to be caught in the middle of this with your pants down, unprepared. One of the things that you're going to have is some kind of tradable commodity, because when things begin to break down during this conflict, and they will, and even if it's resolved peaceably, there will be a period of time where the economy is being straightened out, where a devaluation of the dollar is inevitable. Nothing can stop it. It's going to happen. The only real money that's ever existed in the history of the world, that has been acknowledged by all peoples in all countries at all times, during war, out of war, during total complete collapse, anarchy, or the height of flourishing civilizations, has been precious metals in their various forms, and specifically in the law of the United States and in the Constitution, that money is called gold and silver coin. Call our sponsors and do it now. You know we all tend to procrastinate. Talk to them about how you can acquire some real money that can get you through the hard times ahead. 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. Call now, folks. You'll be glad that you did. A great weight will be taken off your shoulders, and you'll feel a lot better. Look around at your loved ones. If you can't look them in the eye and tell them that you've taken care of this specific problem, then you must make this call. If you don't want to deal with our sponsors, that's okay, but deal with someone. I care about you. I don't want you to get hurt. So deal with someone. If you have derived real knowledge, real worth from listening to this broadcast, I hope that you will patronize those who have supported us, and that's Swiss America Trading. 1-800-289-2646. Do it now, folks. You'll be real happy that you did. But you keep listening to the Hour of the Time, and you will find out what you're looking for. We'll give you all the answers, if not tonight, tomorrow night, or the next night. But cumulatively, this audience, the audience of the Hour of the Time, is the most well-educated body of people in the entire world. Welcome back, Dr. Schroeder.
Okay, Bill. Let's go to this memorandum of law that attaches with the Trading with the Enemy Act. And exactly what you were just saying on your commercial break was true. Let's read the first case. It's the Rapid 1814. Every species of intercourse with the enemy is illegal. And remember that we're now the enemy. This prohibition is not limited to mere commercial intercourse. If we go to the Trading with the Enemy Act in the body, it says the trade or commerce regulated or prohibited is defined in subsections A, B, C, D, and E of this act. This trade covers almost every imaginable transaction and is forbidden and made unlawful except when allowed under the form of license issued by the Secretary of Commerce. This authorization of trading under license constitutes the principal modification of the rule of international law forbidding trade between the citizens of the belligerents. For the power to grant such license and therefore exemption from the operation of the law is given by the bill. So you see that what this is saying is that once we become the status or take on the status of an enemy, everything that we do is now illegal. The only way it can then be made legal is through some form of grant of permission from the government in the form of license, permits, or whatever.
And this is why all the things that never required licenses after 1933 had to be licensed, including marriage, including birth, everything.
Including driving, including anything that you want to do. That everything that the American people, who had originally derived their rights from God, now declared to be illegal.
The definition of an activity requiring license is something that is illegal under the law.
That's right. That's right. The only reason you have to have a license is because it is illegal. So you remember that the things that we could normally do as a right given as an inherent right from God were now declared to be illegal, and therefore we had to have a license from government in order to do it. It's amazing what happened. But as a result, because of those international agreements and because of this law of nations that now came over us, and by the way, this is the law of nations, we can read this, Sally. By the general law of prize, property engaged in an illegal intercourse with the enemy is deemed enemy property. You see that this is the law of prize that now came over us, that no longer were we under the common law, no longer were we under our Constitution, but now we were under this international law of nations, the law of prize, that we were subject as enemies to all of these international agreements. That basically the 7 nations of the world, of the Western world, all declared emergency governments at the same time and declared the sovereign capacity of these nations. That they took all the rights of man and took them into the executive heads of these governments, declaiming under this international agreements now that they were a one world government. They made all the rules by international agreement, and we were then bound under the law of nations to these agreements.
Well, now that we know what's happened and how we got in the position that we're into, what do we do about it, Gene?
Let's talk, Bill, about the meeting that you participated in, myself, back in Kansas City just 2 weeks ago.
A little more than that, but that's okay.
2 or 3 weeks ago, whenever that was, when the parties, the minor parties of the United States, came together in that meeting. And out of that meeting, we reached an agreement that the parties would run one candidate for president, and that this president would have to agree that he was going to meet some of the criteria and do some of the things that the people or the parties that were present at that meeting agreed to do. One of the things that we talked about, and we agreed that we would have to run a president who would agree to go back to Washington and issue the executive order to terminate this form of world government that's over us, this world power. And I think that's a critical step in the first, as a step in the right direction. Bill, why don't you go ahead and elaborate some of the things that the parties agreed to there?
Well, number one, of course, was the greatest accomplishment in my mind was getting all of these different disparate leaders of these disparate groups to agree on anything. And in the first meeting, which took place in early December, everyone agreed to what we call the Kansas City Resolution, which was to field one presidential and vice presidential candidate who would be committed to restoration of constitutional Republican government and the dissolution of this world body and kick the United Nations completely off our soil and begin the process of restoration of the economy and the nation. And that, to me, was amazing.
Well, that was me also, that the fact that we could bring people of such diverse interests into that meeting with the parties and all their different beliefs to come together under that common agreement. That was also, to me, was simply amazing.
Another thing that I found surprising was that some of the people there did not have the depth of knowledge or the understanding that you and I and maybe some others had, and still understanding that something was wrong, were willing to listen and begin their process of education, which brought them up to speed, and I have to say in a very short period of time. The second meeting, of course, was to find out, now what are we going to do about this resolution? We've made the resolution. Now how are we going to take action to make this come to pass? And we arrived at some conclusions there and put together some committees, and that really was not a fruitful meeting, other than we saw that it just wasn't a one meeting thing, and we began to put together committees and people to bring up action plans to actually put this resolution into motion. And of course, the third meeting was really two meetings, and I was not there for a good portion of the first meeting, so why don't you talk about that one?
Well, also, at that first meeting, I wasn't present for a good portion of that meeting also, Bill, so I couldn't specifically talk to that. But one of the things that I felt also was critically important was what you just mentioned, that even though a lot of the people that were there probably didn't have the levels of understanding that maybe you or I or some of the other people had going in, but it was obvious that once we could present the hard evidence to show what had happened, that then those people came up to speed very quickly, and they could see that there were very specific things that had to be done in order to begin to approach a resolution to this crisis that we're now in.
And one thing that everybody, and there were some people there who are extremely intelligent and have been working all their life in the public sector and trying to make this a better country and a better world and a better city or wherever they came from. And one of the things that I found absolutely enlightening and very promising is that to a person, without exception, everyone realized that the answer does not lie in the established political process as it exists today.
I think that was obvious. That almost unanimously, the people that were there agreed that the present process is dysfunctional, that it's not working and it's not going to work, that there have to be radical changes made.
And one of the things agreed to was that all of us are committed to making those changes, and that I believe that there's an awakening going across the country, not just amongst leaders, but amongst all of the people, that the Republican Democratic Party are actually one party with two heads, all reaching for the same goal, and that is dissolution of the sovereignty of the United States of America, a complete elimination of probably the middle class, a redistribution of wealth in world government.
I think that's true. And I think that became so obvious as we really began to look at some of the critical things that had happened, realizing that even though Roosevelt was a Democrat, that after Roosevelt, we've had, I think, 10 other administrations, both Republican and Democrat. And not one of those administrations has made any attempt to terminate this form of government that was imposed upon us by Roosevelt. That every one of those administrations, those presidents, and those Congresses had the opportunity to come forth with enough political courage to say, the crisis is over, the wars are over, and let's terminate this form of government and return back to our normal constitutional peacetime constitution. But not one of these administrations have done it, whether Republican or Democrat.
Not only that, but none of them have ever made any effort to turn away from the path that the previous administrations have set us on.
That's right. It seems as though it's almost the inherent nature of governments. And I guess history should teach us something that once a government gains power, it's very reluctant to give that power back up to the people. And so I guess in that respect that's what's happened in this country is no different than probably what we would expect of any other government on the face of this earth.
Well, you know the old, well, I don't know if you know or not, but there's an old saying about children. You be very careful what you give children, because you can give it to them, but it's very difficult to take it away. And by golly, that applies 1,000 times over for power and wealth. When you give someone power, they're likely to fight you to the death before they give up an inch of it.
Yes, they are, and especially when you talk about power on the scale that's been developed worldwide now under this form of government for the last 61 years. Remember, that this entire industrial revolution began to take place during this same period of time we're talking about. And think of the enormous power, wealth that's been accumulated now in the hands of this international government that was formed back then. Obviously, they're going to be very reluctant to give it up.
That's why I find it very difficult to talk to some people who really believe that there's going to be some kind of a peaceful political resolution to this along traditional lines. There may be a peaceful resolution, but it's certainly not going to be along traditional lines. And it's difficult when you're talking to someone who believes that to really, even when they understand, it's hard to get them to look at reality. Now, in that first meeting of the last attendance that we had there in Kansas City, which was in early February, the first meeting was actually to discuss how our team, so to speak, once we win the election, I believe that we can do that, once they establish their administration in Washington, how they're going to return the economy to constitutional money and an economy that works not on a debt-based system, but on a real people-created wealth type system. And I got to tell you, I was not at a good portion of that meeting. I came in late, but I did participate for the portion that I was there, and quite vociferously, because I saw that there was a faction there that did not understand really what constitutional money was, and had all kinds of outlandish plans, although they may have been well-intended and they may have been good plans if that kind of a thing was what was desirable. it was a battle to get that on track to where constitutional money was what we were really talking about.
Yes, it was. And of course, there at Article 1, Section 10, it's very explicit, where it says that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin in tender and payment of debt.
I think the big thing that mattered so much to most people was the admonition that if we really believe in what we say we believe in, if we're really who we say we are, then before we monkey with anything, we must return to a Republican constitutional form of government, which means constitutional money, and then deal with whatever changes need to be made legitimately and not through fraud or deceit or
crisis or whatever.
Right.
And I agreed so much with what you had said at that meeting that whatever our opinions are really are of no significance, are they?
That's
that
correct.
We have a law, a supreme law of the land. And if we're going to return to it, then we must return to it, irregardless of what our opinions are. Then if we have opinions that differ from that supreme law of the land, there are legitimate ways under that Constitution that we can amend it, but only once we get it back into its normal peacetime mode.
That's correct.
And I think one of the things that I think this is why education is so important, Bill, and I think probably we could see it at that meeting, that once the people begin to come up to speed with some of the specifics of what we were talking about, then we began to get agreement, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Only once they began to understand more specifically what we were dealing with before they come around and said, well, fundamentally, you're right, that these are the things we have to do. And I think going into that meeting that many of us realized that let's go back to what Roosevelt said there on his documents when he issued that Proclamation 2039 and seized the money of the people. Now, he says, after he issued that proclamation, this is Roosevelt speaking in his own notes, he says, we knew that it would be essential when the banks reopened to have an adequate supply of currency to meet all possible demands of depositors. You see that really we're not in any different position what Roosevelt was, are we?
No, not at all.
We terminate this form of government that's existed over us all these years. Then when we terminate, there's no money, is there?
No, not at all.
There is absolutely no money. The banks are all closed again.
In fact, if we wanted to be absolutely honest in the concept of the definition of real money, there's no real money today.
That's right, and there is none today. So realizing that we fundamentally said the same thing when we went into that meeting, that we knew that if we terminate this form of government, when the banks reopen Monday morning, there has to be an adequate supply of money to meet all the demands of the depositors, don't there?
Right.
Because if there's not, then we've got automatic chaos. We've got immediate crisis in this country. And we were hoping to come up with some form of an agreement that would be constitutional, that at least we could come into a soft landing, that we don't want this thing to crash if we can prevent it, do we?
That's correct.
So that was the dilemma that we had to work through in that meeting. And I think it was from the understandings of specifically what had went wrong, and specifically of the understandings of what our Constitution requires, that we were able to come to at least to those fundamental agreements. That there would have to be certainly a new currency issued. Or we didn't even call it currency, we called it the money, didn't we?
That's right.
And that money had to be backed by gold and silver coin.
That's correct.
So we made that agreement that we don't know how much gold there is, we don't know how much silver there is. We haven't had an audit of that thing in 61 years. But there's some there, surely. And whatever amount is there is going to have to back the new money that's issued. And the new money that will be issued will have to be issued as a debt-free, interest-free money. That it will not represent an obligation or a debt upon anyone. And that's a fundamental characteristic of the money that's going to have to be issued when we terminate this form of government. I think we all realize that if we are effective and we do elect a president that will go back and do the things that have to be done, that was one of the first agreements we had to get to in order to prevent chaos from reigning in this country when we do it.
That's correct.
And needless to say, Bill, and with the help of everyone, with a lot of hard work and perseverance, we were able to come up with those fundamental agreements. That was a critical first step.
And even some tears.
Yes, there were. And with a lot of praying, wasn't there?
Yes, absolutely. the amount of true dedication and real feeling and I don't believe that anyone there would have hesitated for one instant to give their life for this country if they were called upon to do it without hesitation at any given moment. And that's the kind of people that we were dealing with. That set the stage for the next meeting that resulted in the organization known as CURE, which I've already told you all about, and urged you to begin to form your tab teams and get involved. And we're just out of time, so I don't want to get into that tonight. And we're going to talk more about that on some of that. Do you have enough material that you'd like to come back tomorrow night, Gene?
Bill, certainly I'd be glad to do that, and maybe we can come back. And another thing I'd like to talk about maybe a little bit tomorrow night briefly is this common law grand jury that's been called, this national grand jury that's set in Wichita, Kansas for June the 3rd and the 4th.
I was hoping that you'd want to talk about that, but I didn't want to twist your arm.
Let's talk about that tomorrow.
Okay, good. Do you have an address or a phone number where people can reach you if they wish, and do you have any materials that they can obtain from you, Gene? We didn't even talk about that before the broadcast.
I wouldn't. We just issued that book, Constitution, Fact or Fiction.
Okay.
It fundamentally deals with some of these problems. If anyone would like to have information on that book, they could call an 800 number. That number is 1-800-610-4908.
Okay, folks, you heard him. 1-800-610-4908. And I've got to tell you something. I've known Dr. Gene Schroeder for some time now, and I've known about him and read a lot of the things that he's done and listened to him for a long time before I ever met him. So I can tell you without even seeing his book that it's worth acquiring, and his depth of knowledge and the amount of research and study that he's done on the problems that exist in America today are right up there on top with the very best that you can find. So call 1-800-610-4908. That's 1-800-610-4908 and ask about how you can get his book. Gene, thank you. We'll see you again tomorrow night.
Very good, Bill. Same time.
Same time, same station. Good night, my friend. And good night, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless each and every single one of you.
All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, there's a loud knock on your door. Hey, honey, something's not right.
Throw out your arms. This is the Wild Master. We're here from the government. We're here to help you.
And I'm from the IRS with a power to attack. If you've got a complaint, send us a fax.
Get out of this house. Surrender your guns. Give me your gold. You may obey if you want to come home. That's the good stuff and do when you're told.
Hillary Salala, Reno Janet Dyke, reading the words of General Albert Pike, demonic founder of the Ku Klux Klan, engineer of the Masonic Master Plan. Pike said Lucifer is God across this land, and Clinton saying take the mark in your right hand. While we're all dancing to the drums of our Fourth Reich, Clinton's preparing it for another huge tax hike. Order out of chaos, depression, inflation, create the panic and rape the nation. Crisis creation, incite black and white, program agitation. While we're all dancing to the drums of our Fourth Reich, Clinton's preparing it for another huge tax hike. Order out of chaos, depression, inflation, create the panic and rape the nation. Crisis creation, incite black and white, program agitation. Hit the mark in your right hand. While we're all dancing to the drums of a fourth right, Clinton's preparing it for another huge tax hike.
Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. The newspaper looks beautiful. I've got to tell you, folks, if it wasn't for Mike and Bart and Sharon, who have come to help me with this, I wouldn't be able to do half the things that I'm doing around here now. We're all working all the time. Nobody's taking any time off and late into the evening. But it's a lot of fun, and I think you're going to be very pleased with the outcome. If you'd like to subscribe to Veritas, our newspaper, and it is a newspaper, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a tabloid. It's not a newsletter. It's a newspaper. It's $50 for 24 issues. 24 issues. Make checks and money orders to Veritas, spelled V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S, and send them. Of course, we prefer cash or gold or silver coin, preferably gold or silver coin. We'll also take 57 Chevys, if you have one. Post Office Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. That's P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. So, get your subscription in. Also, the Forever Free America rally that was scheduled for March 11th, 1995 in San Bernardino has been rescheduled. I don't know what caused this. They say due to technical difficulties beyond their control. And they've rescheduled it to April the 22nd, 1995. That's April the 22nd, 1995. That's the Forever Free America rally that was scheduled. It's not scheduled anymore for March 11th. It was going to be on March 11th. It is now rescheduled for April the 22nd, 1995. Let me see. If you'd like to call for information, call 602-205-2386. That's 602-205-2386. Now, I was going to tell you tonight when we were going to have another seminar here, and this has really put the wrench in it because we were going to reschedule have a seminar at about that time, and I've already committed to go and speak at this event. So I've got to clear this up, folks, and I'll try to do that tomorrow and let you know tomorrow night when we're going to have our seminar here and how much it will cost and all that kind of good stuff. And I think, there's one other thing. The Constitution Party is in dire need of the services of some legal mind who has experience with political parties and elections and things like that. So if you are one of those type of people and you would like to volunteer to help us out with some pretty important organizing things and questions that we don't know how to solve, please contact me. sometime tomorrow afternoon at 602-337-2562. That's 602-337-2562. Now, if you don't know anything about these things, please don't call, because we don't know, and we can't teach you, and we haven't got time for anybody to learn. We need advice now. So please, if you are a legal mind or a legal person or a lawyer or anybody like that who understands the political party process, elections, and funds and all that kind of stuff, please give me a call tomorrow at 602-337-2562. Also, write me a letter. William Cooper, P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936, and tell me whether or not you will commit to a March on Washington in September. We need to know, and we need to know now. And if we don't get a big response, we're going to just drop it right where it stands. Okay, folks, tonight we have again as our guest Dr. Gene Schroeder. Those of you who were listening last night got an earful, and a lot of this information is going to be in the first issue of the newspaper, and a lot of things that Dr. Schroeder didn't discuss that we have researched here. And folks, we never have time to go fully into everything that we want to go into in 1 hour, ever. It's just impossible. He's back tonight to talk about some good things that have happened and that may happen down the line. I'm sorry we won't be able to take your calls, but pay close attention. Also, what we're going to be talking about is good, fun stuff, so upbeat tonight.
Yeah.
Here he comes. Dr. Gene Schroeder. Dancing across the floor. The Constitution in his hand. Oh, I love it. I should have been a DJ. I would have had more fun. Some of the topics we talk about on here aren't too much fun. Dr. Schroeder, welcome to the Hour of the Time.
Bill, again, it's my pleasure.
We got to have a little fun sometime.
It seems like we always need that, don't we, Bill?
We sure do. What have you been up to that we're going to talk about tonight?
Well, what we're going to talk about, what I thought we might talk about, is the courts.
Okay.
I'm sitting here in Las Vegas, and we just was here to offer testimony into a case, IRS case, and as in many cases, the attempt was, so far, has been highly unsuccessful.
Well, I can tell something didn't go right today because I can hear it in your voice.
Well, yeah, and it's nothing that we didn't anticipate or didn't expect, but again, with the evidences that were going to be presented, they were going to be irrefutable, that the government could not win this case. So as a result, what happened was they simply dismissed the case without allowing any evidence to go in. And that's a typical response. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about tonight, is set a little bit of the foundation as to what kind of courts it is we're dealing with, and then what we're thinking that we're ultimately going to have to do, and talk about some of the things we have planned. So let's take that. Bear with me just a minute.
Okay. Let's
go back and do just a little brief review. Let's go back to the current law of today, the one we talked about last night. Let's go back to Title 12, 95B. Title 12 U.S.C. United States Code. This is the current law. And let's read this thing again. It says, the actions, regulations, rules, license, orders, and proclamations heretofore or hereafter taken, promulgated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury since March the 4th of 1933 Pursuant to this authority that was conferred by subsection B of Section 5 of the War Power Act of October the 6th, 1917, as amended, are hereby approved and confirmed. Now, again, what does that say? It says that the President or the Secretary of the Treasury can issue any order that they want to. Heretofore, that means in the past or hereafter taken in the future.
Right.
And they are automatically approved and confirmed under the war power of government, aren't they? This says that the President can do anything he wants to do. And that's the current law of today.
Well, it literally gives him dictatorial powers, which have not ended right up to the present.
Now, let's go a little bit further, and let's see some of the things that this dictatorial power, this executive power, carried into. Let's go to March the 2nd of 1934. This is out of Roosevelt's papers. And here he is saying that this is his request for authority to consummate reciprocal trade agreements for the revival of foreign trade. Let me read the first paragraph of his papers. He says, I am requesting the Congress to authorize the executive to enter into executive commercial agreements with foreign nations. Now, you see, under our Constitution, it says that the President shall have the power to make treaties by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, providing 2/3 of the senators present concur. But we see here that the President is asking for an executive power to enter into agreements, purely an executive function. And, of course, needless to say, on June the 12th, under the war powers, Congress confers that authority upon him. He still has those powers today. Example. A couple of weeks ago, Mexico decided they needed, I think, $40 billion to bail out the banks because they were going to default on some loans. And the peso, as a result of that, was dropping dramatically. Congress said, well, really, we don't have $40 billion to give to Mexico, so we don't think we can do it. But we've seen Commander-in-Chief Bill Clinton say, well, not a problem. I can certainly do this on my own executive power. So he issued an executive order to go ahead and give the $40 billion to Mexico, didn't he? Okay. So we see that under these agreements...
I'm sitting here shaking my head.
Right. Yes, I understand. But now we see here that we just read from on let me look at the date of that again. Not that it's critical, but there in 1934, on March the 2nd, he requested this executive authority, and on June the 12th, he got it. At that point, the President, purely as an executive power, was then able to enter into GATT agreements of all types and natures, which he did. There are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them that he entered into.
People think GATT is new. GATT is not new, and I've said that over and over and over again. It goes all the way back to actually before then. But
yes, it absolutely culminating beginning on March the 9th of 33, and the specific act coming on June the 12th called the International Trade Agreements Act, bequesting upon our President that authority. So, but the point of it is that we see that this is purely an executive function. Okay?
Yes.
So consequently, all of these agreements that have now resulted in the international statutes and the international laws, which controls almost everything we do. And if we look at those hundreds of executive agreements, we'll see them, how they affect our everyday lives. From the OSHAs to the EPAs, to the right down to the motor vehicle safety codes, to the Social Securities, the old age pensions, and on and on. Where these agreements were made with the foreign nations and then implemented in this country as international law.
That's right.
Okay. This being strictly, and again, an executive function.
Right.
So consequently, if the courts are going to hear matters of this nature, what kind of courts must they be?
Has to be an admiralty court.
They have to be executive courts, don't they?
Right.
Have to be the admiralty courts. And if we go back into the history of the admiralty courts, where do we find that court coming from? It came from the King's Bench, or from the King's Courts, did it? One of the courts of Westminster.
Right.
And those courts were strictly the King's Courts. They were in total contradistinction from the common law. The courts of the common law that were the law of the land during the peacetime. These were the courts and the laws of the sea, purely under the power of the king. So when we went into this war power, or under this war government back in 1933, as a result, we've seen the courts change. We've seen the law change. And we know if we look at the memorandum of laws that govern that Act of October 6, 1917, that was the international law, the law of nations, that came upon us. That is governed by the King's courts. That's the courts of admiralty. So as a result, the courts that we have today are not the courts of the common law. The common law at the federal level was abolished in 1938 at Erie Railroad versus Tompkins, Supreme Court case. And the common law over the states was abolished at the same time when this admiralty jurisdiction was conferred upon the courts under that Federal Rules of Civil Procedures Act, which they called a merger of law and equity, which was no more than the extension of that wartime admiralty jurisdiction across the land.
That's right. That's how to deal with the prize.
Right. So now it becomes a very real and practical question. Can we go into their courts, the executive courts, and expect to win?
Not theoretically.
Obviously, we're going to have major difficulties there, aren't we?
Yes.
Those are the things we run into on a daily basis. With that in mind, we then begin to say, well, how is it possible that we could reform the People's Court, the common law courts of the country? That is when we began to do some of the things back almost 2 years ago. And under the rules of necessity, remember the rules of necessity are the rules of war. No other options available. Then one has the right to do whatever becomes necessary. Realizing that that is the same rules that the government used over us when they placed the war powers on us in the first place. If we go back to the Declaration of Independence, when our forefathers declared the independence from Great Britain, in the first sentence we said, whenever in the course of human events it becomes necessary. The rule of necessity, that's the rule of war. The same thing that our Congress told us there on March the 9th of 1933 at 48 Stat 1 in the enabling portion of that act, when they said that the Congress hereby declares that a serious emergency exists and that it is imperatively necessary speedily to put into effect remedies of uniform national application, again under the rules of necessity. So we said, we the people also have the absolute right to declare the rules of necessity. Because of the fact that we have not had a court for 61 years in this country, that now operating under the rules of necessity, we must reform our courts. We must take our court back and put it back into position. With those concepts in mind, beginning about 2 years ago, a group of people from different parts of the country published the formation of the one Supreme Court under our Constitution. They published that court for 6 months in the Oklahoma City newspaper, telling the government that if you have any objections, respond. That notice ran for six months in that newspaper. There was no response and no objections from any officials of any type. Following that, the Supreme Court, the one Supreme Court, met for the first time in Kingfisher, Oklahoma. That was almost a year ago. And we began to work with that court to get rulings of facts and laws that pertain to all of these cases that could not be heard in the King's Court. From that point in time, this court has grown. And it's now beginning to gain wide acceptance, at least among many of the patriot communities across the country. 2 weeks ago, when the court met in York, Nebraska, they called for a national sitting of the court and the grand jury. Called the grand jury to set for June the 3rd and the 4th in Wichita, Kansas. That court is now preparing to set. We are preparing the notices for the government officials. The President and the Secretary of the Treasury will both be notified. We will also notify the Speaker of the House and the Senate. We will also notify the Supreme Court. These notices will notify the Senate and the House of Representatives to read this notice before the full houses of both bodies, so that everyone is notified. And in the notice, we have said that probable cause exists to believe that the Constitution of this country has been effectively set aside under the war powers, and the people are going to hear the facts and the evidence as to whether or not this be true, so that if any government official wants to come and defend their actions, to come to the grand jury and plead their case. Certainly at the same time, we have said that the people are going to prosecute the case, and we're going to present the evidence and the facts as to what has happened in this country. And from that, we will ask this national grand jury to make a finding of the facts and the law as it pertains to this situation in the country. That we intend to do in Wichita, Kansas, on the 3rd and the 4th of June. We are hoping that we will get a widespread turnout of people from all across the country to come and listen to the facts that will be presented at the case, so that we can get a grand jury determination of this important issue once and for all. If we can get a favorable verdict from that grand jury, and of course, maybe I'm biased, but I don't think so, the facts and the evidence, I think, are conclusive. And if we can get a favorable ruling out of that grand jury, then I think at least we've made a step in the right direction, that we can go into any one of these executive courts that exist in this United States today, and that's all of them, and place the finding of facts in the law that has been found by the people of this country in front of that court and say, here it is. The issues have already been settled. And in this country, during times of peace, the only law that it can exist is the common law under our Constitution. The courts that are operating, of course, are totally and blatantly violating those procedures. The courts, as we see them today, are totally dysfunctional. It is with that in mind that we have called this court in Wichita, and I think at least it's another step in the right direction.
Well, it sounds good. It sounds promising, but there are some questions that have to be asked, Gene, and maybe you can answer them.
Okay.
Number one is, if this court sits, what authority does it have, and what guarantee does anyone have that anyone outside of those holding the court will honor that authority?
Well, there's no guarantees. Realizing that realistically, the court and the grand jury that will sit in Wichita has no police power. That as of today, the only police power, the only military power that exists is that of the federal government to enforce.
But you're wrong. Let me set that straight. Okay?
Yes.
The Constitution allows for, and tradition and the law of this nation says that the militia, in times when the country is being invaded, or there has been an insurrection, or the laws of the Union are being infringed, that the militia shall repel invasion, put down insurrection, and enforce the laws of the Union. And that is a fact. In fact, that's the responsibility of the American people as a whole.
I highly appreciate that response, because it's absolutely true. That the only legitimate police power that exists in this country, in the land, is the police power that is set out in the voluntary militias for the states. You see our Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 says Congress shall have the power to provide and maintain a navy. That's a standing military power for the federal government in it.
And it's the only...
as it was in England, realizing England was an island nation.
Right, and it's the only one allowed during peacetime.
And it's the only one allowed during peacetime. But remember that military power, or that police power, stopped at the ebb and flow of the tide. It stopped where that ship could not go, didn't it?
That's correct.
And once you stepped across the ebb and flow of the tide, then you stepped into what was called the body of the counties of the states.
Right.
And within the bodies of the counties, there was no federal military police power. That the police power that sat there was the police power of the states. and that was contained in the state militias. Article 1, Section 8 also said that Congress shall have the power to raise and support an army, but no appropriations of funds shall be for a term greater than 2 years. The only time the inland army could be raised was during a time of war, and it went on and said that the army shall be raised from the state militias. So consequently, we see that there was no standing federal military power within the states.
That's correct.
So therefore, it is critically important that our militias across the states, the volunteer militias that are now beginning to form, realize and begin to understand the legitimate function of that state militia, and that the people all across the nation must realize that that's their duty, that this is not a paid position. It's not a position that where they have to go and be on continuous call, but every person was required to own firearms, so that on a moment's notice they could be called up into that body, into that state militia, to defend the states. That was part of the separation of powers. Therefore, it's critically important that our state militias continue to form so that in the future they can provide their legitimate function. Once that body comes into formal fashion, where it has the support and everything that's needed, then we will begin to gain the police power back to this court that is sitting in Wichita.
For instance, if the court were to find that the facts presented before it were, in fact, true, and that the insurrection had already taken place a long time ago,
yes,
and that the nation was not functioning as a constitutional Republican government, if that court were to order the arrest of those who were guilty of treason, it would then be the job of the militia to carry out that order.
Yes, it would. And realize that the legitimate state militias must operate under the legitimate civilian authority, don't they?
That's correct.
So as a first step, we felt like it was critically important that we begin to establish the legitimate common law body. Number one, the grand jury and the court to start with, so that at least we were operating in a constitutional mode and in a constitutional fashion, to whereby, number one, we can then commission from that body the legitimate militias that are forming. At least that way, we continue down a lawful path.
That's right. It is extremely important that everything that we do be legal, lawful, and constitutional.
Yes, it is. And I know Bill, you and I discussed that to some length over in Kansas City concerning the money.
That's right.
And it's so important that if we do things, that we have to do it in a totally lawful and constitutional manner. We keep all of our cards above the table so that there is no chance that we can be labeled as anything but purely operating in a lawful manner.
That's correct. It is our duty, it is our obligation, it is legal and lawful and constitutional to support the law of the land and the return of constitutional Republican government. Anything other than that is not.
Our Declaration of Independence said, but when a long train of abuses pursuing invariably a design to place us under absolute despotism, then it's not only our right, but it's our duty to throw off that form of government and provide new guards for our future security.
That's correct. But one word of caution, whenever we do that, then everything is up in the air and there's no guarantee for anybody and no safety for anybody until such a conflict is settled.
That's very true. So therefore, education is a critical first step, so that at least the people, the masses of people across our country, understand what it is that's going on and why it is that we're doing the things that we're doing. If they can't understand, then it's awfully hard for them to support, isn't it?
Well, it's not only hard for them to support, but given the degree of education and the amount of brainwashing that the average American experiences on a daily basis, it's amazing to me that anybody at all understands.
Well, and that's really true. And again, then that brings us back to our educational system. And we see all the downfalls that we went through in the past. And those were our responsibilities. That it was never the responsibility of government to educate our children, was it?
No.
That was the responsibility of us, the parents.
And it should never be allowed for the government to educate our children.
That's true. That's our number one and prime responsibility, and we're the ones that failed in that.
That's correct.
It wasn't government. That we should never have turned them children over to the government in the first place. That's what they did down in the communist countries.
Well, the truth is, and since we're dealing with the truth, and you and I like the truth an awful lot, and so do the listeners of this broadcast, the truth is that if we had fulfilled our responsibilities and had been vigilant, as our forefathers had warned us to be, and had maintained our education of our children and the principles and ideals upon which this nation was founded, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. So really, if we want to get right down to it, whose fault is it if the proprietor of a store walks out the door and leaves the cash drawer open and doesn't come back for a week?
It can only be ours.
That's right.
It can only be our responsibilities and our liabilities. Those have to be corrected. If we do not correct the conditions that exist in this country and do not begin to take our rightful status and our station among mankind, then we can never hope or deserve to have anything but exactly what we're going to get.
Absolutely correct. Words of wisdom. Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back after this short pause. Of it. They're all applauding, of course, for the hour of the time and for our sponsor, Swiss America Trading, who do such a good job of providing the services that you need in order to get your hands on some real money in any of its various and nefarious and different forms, both usable and not so readily usable. Folks, it is imperative not only that you learn what has happened to this country and learn where we're at and how we got here and where we have to go, but you have to learn exactly what all this means. What does it mean when you spend a Federal Reserve note to make a payment on your home? What does it mean when you think you've paid off your home and you're looking at what's called a warrant deed? How does a warrant deed compare to an allodial patent deed? What does all this mean? Why do you get a certificate of title when you think you've paid off your automobile instead of the title? What does this mean? Why do you have to have a birth certificate for your children? Why is it that if you go to an auction, and I have witnessed this myself, and everyone else bids and pays in Federal Reserve notes, and someone else bids a much smaller amount in silver coin, the person who bid and paid the silver coin walks off with whatever it was he bid on, since he was the only bidder who bid and paid in legal and lawful money. If you don't understand these things, folks, you'd better make a call to our sponsor, and you'd better get into the books and start studying. And the very first thing that you need to study is the Declaration of Independence. The very second thing that you need to study are the Articles of Confederation. And the third thing that you need to study is the Constitution for the United States of America. And then you need to stop running around saying inalienable, because the correct term is unalienable. And you better stop referring to constitutional rights, because they are creator-endowed rights protected by a contract called the Constitution. You see, it's very easy for me to get you up on the edge of your chair and make you listen very closely, because I know what I'm talking about, and most of you don't. Some of you do. Dr. Gene Schroeder does. The people at Swiss America Trading understand these things. Call them. You need some real money. Paper is not money. Currency is not money. Money is defined clearly in the law. A dollar is not money. A dollar is a measurement of money. Call Swiss America Trading, 1-800-289-2646. Do it now, 1-800-289-2646. You'll be glad that you did. If you cannot right now look your loved ones in the eye and tell them that you have prepared for any unforeseen economic emergency, then you must make this call. If you are a responsible person and if you truly love them, you must make this call. And if you decide not to do business with Smith America Trading, at least call somebody. Do business with somebody. Get some legal, lawful, constitutional money in your pockets. 1-800-289-2646. Do it now. You'll be glad that you did. Folks, I think the next seminar we have, we're going to have a dance. We just got to do that. Gene, welcome back.
Okay, Bill. One warning, that as we begin to reform the militias, as we begin to reform the common law court and the common law bodies of this country, one thing we've got to be very careful about is that probably that we don't move too quickly. Because you see, if we do things that are not entirely appropriate, this could put ourselves into a position where the government could declare a full-blown emergency again. And they could bring the real military troops, not the ones that are dressed in the suits and the ties that we see today, but the full-blown military troops inland again and place us under martial law. So we also have to be very careful in how we begin to approach this endeavor.
That's been a constant warning from this pulpit, so to speak.
I appreciate that, Bill.
People write me and talk about my ministry. My ministry is a ministry of freedom, and I want everybody to stay just as free as they can for as long as they can. And one of the things that they have to do is not just allow anybody into the militia, not pay any attention to all these stupid rumors that are flying around, because there are people out there who want those of us who are attempting to do the right thing to do the wrong thing.
That's very true. So we have to be very careful about the misinformation that exists and the disinformation that exists because it abounds out there today.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about Constitution. Let's go and let's talk. I always like to talk about money and other things.
Who doesn't, Jim?
Let's go to Article 1, Section 10. It says that no state shall
make in payment of debts anything other than gold or silver coin.
That's right. Shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debts, right?
Right.
But now let's go to the last part of the last sentence of Article 1, Section 10, and what does it say? Unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay.
Right.
The exceptionary clause. We go back to March the 4th, 1933. We just read that statute at the beginning of the program again. That all the orders, license, regulations issued since March the 4th of 1933 are hereby approved and confirmed. Roosevelt, in his inaugural address on March the 4th, said, I am going to ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis. Broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency. As great as the power that would be given me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. The same as an invasion, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So here we see the exceptionary clause again, which totally abolished Section 10 of our Constitution. So then what effect did this section have when it says that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt?
Well, it negates everything.
It negated everything, didn't it? So consequently, we've seen this country operating now for 61 years with nothing but obligations upon the American people to place them in perpetual and total servitude, with no ability to repay upon this credit money that was issued there on March the 9th of 1933.
In fact, in a debt-based economy, when you pay off a debt with a note, which is nothing but another instrument of debt, you are literally not owning anything, and you become an indentured service.
Absolutely, and the law cannot apply, can it? Because the common law approached the finality of the transaction.
That's right.
You see, when I paid you for, let's say, a chicken with a gold dollar,
I wish I had a chicken.
I understand. At that point, it was over, wasn't it, Bill?
Yes.
It's finished. There was no other things left to be done.
That's right.
But if I tried to tender you with a note for your chicken, the transaction is not over, is it?
No.
Because before you could ever get paid, you have to go try to collect from whoever was the obligee on that note.
That's right. And if I use that note to purchase something from someone else, then I have compounded the problem.
That's right. And so it goes on and on ad infinitum, and it never terminates. As a result, the law cannot apply to that case, can it?
No.
Therefore, the common law was abolished upon the seizures of our gold by those war powers on March the 9th of 33.
That's right.
But it goes further than that. Let's also take another look at Section 10 of our Constitution, where it says that no state shall enter into any agreement or compact with another state. You see, that was again the separation of powers of the states, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Where it said that no state shall enter into any agreement or compact with another state unless actually invaded and so on.
Right.
So only under the war powers can our states form compacts with other states.
Not only with other states, but with the Federal District of Columbia, which is a state itself.
Yes, or it said with any foreign power, which the federal government was foreign to the states, wasn't it?
Is also a foreign power, yes.
And absolutely, once it began to enter into all the international agreements and alliances, it became a one-world state.
Right.
Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at the Conference of States that's now been called by Governor Leavitt. That this Conference of States has been called, or is in the process of ratification. The resolutions are being passed among the states to call for this convention, which could become a con. That's a constitutional convention to amend our Constitution. But if we look at that amendment or that resolution that's being adopted by the states across the country as we speak tonight, that resolution says that this conference is being convened under the auspices of a 501c3 corporation, under the auspices of the Council of State Governments, which was formed back in 1933.
Actually, 1930.
Yes, even before that. Yes, I agree. How can a corporation of states, a federal corporation, is that a compact and an agreement among states?
I'm sorry, I was talking to someone here, Gene. I didn't hear what you said.
Okay. Well, the question I was just saying is a corporation, is that a compact among states?
No.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Well, if it's between states, yes.
Well, sure. And so we see that the very thing that is being called upon to make this constitutional convention is in itself and of itself unconstitutional under our peacetime Constitution.
Right.
Therefore, I think it's critically important that we begin to bring these issues out to all of our listeners as they begin to hear more and more about this Conference of States that's going to be held, that they realize this thing is totally and completely unlawful under our Constitution, and that we must stand up and make sure that this conference does not go on to turn into a constitutional convention to try to amend the Constitution. The other thing that's critically important is under our Constitution we allow legitimate means under or by which it can be amended. But let me ask this question. If the Constitution is in fact suspended under the war powers, can it be amended?
How can something that's suspended be amended?
Very important and a very important concept. So if we have no Constitution, which the Constitution in and of itself allowed for the amendment, how can it be amended if there is no Constitution?
Well, those of us who understand that this is just a play for the public.
Yes, it is.
If they believe it is done by a legal body that is legally empowered to do it, the public is likely to accept it. When in fact, this organization that is bringing this about is the same organization put together by Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations and the Federal Reserve, which drafted the initial proclamation and put together the legislation that enabled everything that's happened since then, all the way back in 1933.
Very true. So, therefore, I think this is another project that people have to begin to understand and look at very closely. That this is one that could certainly be used to our detriment, so we have to be aware of what's going on there. One other thing that I think we need to talk about on the positive side. We've talked about what we've done in Kansas City in terms of the political fields as to what we're going to do to try to begin to correct the problems that we have. Tonight we've talked about the reformation of the common law, the body politic of the common law people and the common law court as another step in a means to begin to correct the wrongs that exist. Another thing I think we need to talk about that is going on across the country today is the movement on the part of the states to begin to correct the situation. Some of our state leaders...
Excuse me, Gene, is that really a movement to correct, or is that another scam? Because I've talked extensively with Walt Myers about this and with Governor Meekum, and they seem to think that it's not really what it appears to be.
Now, you mean with the Conference of the States or with the 10th Amendment resolutions?
No, I'm talking about with what came out of the meeting of governors.
Right, okay. The meeting with governors, the Conference of the States, I think could easily be a scam. But
No, I'm talking about the paper that the governors put together saying that they want to correct this stuff and they want to do the 10th Amendment resolutions and all this. I forget what it's called.
Okay, that was called the Gettys, or what was it, the resolves there from...
Williamsburg
resolves.
Yes, Williamsburg resolves.
Yes, that's the one I was talking about, the Conference of the States. But let's don't confuse that, Bill.
Well, I don't want to, because you're talking. I'm talking about the Williamsburg resolve,
yes,
and we're talking about the Conference of States that's proposed, and those are two different things.
Okay, are those two different things? I thought they were one and the same.
No, the Conference of States that's being called in the future, that's going to be in effect a constitutional convention, is not the Williamsburg resolve that came out of a previous meeting of governors where they drew up this resolution.
Okay. Well, anyway, in spite of that, now let me talk about the other aspect of the states' movements. This is the one that's being headed up by some of our state people like Charlie Duke, a senator from Colorado, Senator Don Rogers, they're from California, and former Governor Evan Meekum of Arizona, and some of the others. That they were the ones who began to put together and promote the 10th Amendment resolutions.
That's correct.
That was redeclaring the sovereignty of the state. Now realize on March the 6th, before Roosevelt declared the emergency government and his war government, that he first called a convention of the states. And that convention of the states passed by unanimous resolution that Congress give Roosevelt this broad power, this war power. The feeling of the 10th Amendment resolution people within the states is that if the states could give the sovereignty of the states away by resolution, then we could take it back through resolution. Now this is the other states movement that has started, the 10th Amendment resolution groups, that says the only power the federal government has is what we gave it in the Constitution.
Yeah, but I have to jump in here again, because I've studied this 10th Amendment resolution thing, and it is absolutely a scam from the point of view that a resolution without an active clause has no force of law. And if the states are not willing to back up their declarations or resolutions with a military force, then they're just masturbating.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. also realizing that it takes work within the states to get them to back it up.
That's right. Now, I understand Charlie Duke is trying to institute some legislation in Colorado that will put an active clause and some force of law into the resolution passed by the state of Colorado. Is that correct?
Called the Federal Mandates Act.
Okay.
And yes, we begin to put and realizing it's a struggle. Now, don't get me wrong, that saying that the state governments are any better than the federal government, because in many cases they're not, in some cases maybe even worse. But at least it's another step, a beginning step, to try to make some steps in the right direction.
Yeah, and as long as they're incorporated in the federal body, and as long as they're accepting federal funds, they can say whatever they want. Nothing's going to change.
That's very true. That's very true. And of course, as long as they're accepting federal funds, this connotes the idea that the federal government is going to take the funds from the people in the first place.
Yeah.
And as long as that's going on, then we remain in servitude. We remain in bondage, and of course, there's no place we can go under that situation eventually into a total collapse.
Right.
So anyway, I just wanted to make that point, that at least there's another movement out there, states' rights movements, that are beginning to try to make some legitimate steps to redeclare the sovereignty of the states and the people of the states, to try to take this Constitution back and get it back away from that federal government and this war power that we exist under.
Right. Also, folks, I want you to understand that I'm not trying to throw monkey wrenches in here. What I'm trying to do is make everybody realize what the truth is, and I don't want anybody to be out there fooling themselves. We have to understand the real truth and the real situation, and only then can we deal with it.
Yeah. And I think we have to be realistic, Bill, that all of the things we're talking about, whether it be all the parties coming together to try to elect one president they can go up and terminate, or whether it be the people reforming their state courts and their state body, common law bodies, to begin to take it back that way, or whether it be through the states that realize that all of these are only in the beginning steps and they've all got 1 million miles to go. So that we've got to have support, massive support among the peoples of our country. And we've got to have people out there with knowledge that begins to fundamentally and specifically understands what went wrong and specifically what we have to do to correct it. Education is a critical factor in whether this country survives or fails to survive as we know it.
In my estimation, education has been the major task that we have had before us ever since I can remember, and still looms large in the future. And that's what the Hour of the Time is all about. That's why I wrote my book. That's what the newspaper's for. I know that's what you're engaged in, and I know that you have a huge, weighty schedule appearing on new radio stations all across the country and speaking and running back and forth to do things like you're doing in Las Vegas. And we need many, many more people to begin to do this, but they have to come from a source of knowledge, and they've got to come from a source of real research dealing with facts and not all this baloney that's floating around in the so-called patriot communities, which in my estimation largely doesn't exist. But you've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, Gene. Is there something that you'd like to leave us with in that amount of time?
Yeah, let me give a phone number. I just talked with one of the fellows in Kansas there that will be helping to coordinate this common law setting there in Wichita. Let me give his phone number.
Okay.
It's Ed Petrosky. His phone number is area code 316-546-2465. That's area code 316-546-2465. So that anybody that might be interested in that court that's going to set, or in that setting there in Wichita, they could give Ed a call and begin to get some information upon that.
Yeah, and don't think you're going to call and get to sit on the court, folks. It's like any court. The jurors are drawn by lot, and if you want your name put in the hat, I guess calling Ed would be the best way to do it.
Yes, that would be one way to begin to get the information.
Also, you have a book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
Okay. Just before Christmas, we released a book called Constitution, Fact or Fiction. Begin to take a realistic look at where we're at today, and to show the programs that were instituted upon this country that in essence amounted to a nationalization. The subtitle of that book is The Story of a Nation's Descent. from a constitutional republic through a constitutional dictatorship to an unconstitutional dictatorship. And if anyone would be interested in information on that book, I'll give an 800 number. It's 1-800-610-4908. That number again is 1-800-610-4908. And other than that, if anyone would like to contact us personally, let me give the address there in Campo at the American Agriculture Movement office. That's just AAM, standing for the American Agriculture Movement, Box 130, Campo, C-A-M-P-O, Colorado, 81029.
Want to repeat that one time?
Say one more time. That's AAM, Box 130, Campo, C-A-M-P-O, Colorado, 81029.
Well, Gene, how about some words of wisdom to leave the people to think with tonight?
All we can do is do the best we can do, and let's hope we get a lot of help from above.
And you're just one lonely, helpless person, just as vulnerable as anybody else out there listening.
No different from anybody else.
And if you can do what you're doing, just think what all those people who haven't been doing anything yet can accomplish if they just want to.
If they just want to, Bill. Everyone pulling a little bit can pull anything there is.
That's right. Thank you, Gene, for being a wonderful guest, and thank you for all the information that you brought, your years of study and expertise, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for all that you've done and all that you continue to do.
Well, Bill, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the programs like you're putting on here tonight, and thank you very much also.
And folks, good night, and God bless each and every single one of you.
Yeah.
WCR, Nashville, Tennessee, USA. Worldwide Christian Radio.
You're listening to The Hour of the Time. I'm Pete Leskritz. Tonight, folks, our guest will be Dr. Gene Schroeder. And we'll be back with him after this short music break. Glad you could make it. Never in human history has so few taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and their warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've extorted your jobs and surrendered our arms. Hello, Gene.
Yeah, Pete.
How are you doing tonight?
Well, doing pretty good. Pretty good, Pete. I hear that I'm going to get to be the host of the program tonight.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a night.
Well, that's good. So, all the listeners to the Bill Cooper program tonight, you're going to get to hear her first. This is Dr. Gene Schroeder, and for the first time, I'm going to be hosting a program, not as a guest, but as a host. So, this is going to be the first, so bear with me, and we'll try to make this thing as enjoyable and as entertaining, and at least as educational as what Bill would have done if he would have been on the air himself.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so Pete, with that in mind, I think I want to talk to the listeners tonight a little bit about the history of some of the things we've talked about on Bill's show before. And basically what I want to talk about is the war powers of government. Realizing that this country went under the war powers for the last time on March the 9th of 1933. And in fact, I'll just read a little bit of the introduction of Senate Report 93-549, and it says the majority of the people of the United States have lived all their lives under emergency rule. It says for 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws but into force by states of national emergency. It says in the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crises have, from at least the Civil War, in important ways shaped this present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. This same report goes on and says that this vast range of powers, taken together, confers enough authority to rule this country without reference to normal constitutional processes. It says, under these powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communications, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways control the lives of all American citizens. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I just read right there was read from the government's own documents. This is Senate Report 93-549. This report that they were speaking of here began on March the 9th of 1933 when this country was placed under a state of declared national emergency by the United States Congress. And in order to do that, this country amended an act of October the 6th, 1917, called the Trading with the Enemy Act. And upon the amending of that act, the American people and all of their financial transactions were made the same as enemy transactions. And under this act, the President of the United States was given total authoritarian control over everything and all the transactions that we, the American people, conduct. It's critically important that we understand that, but it's also as much critically important that we go back and understand the history of where that Trading with the Enemy Act came from. The Trading with the Enemy Act of October the 6th, 1917 actually had its originations in an act of 1798. That act was called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And in just a few moments, I'm going to read to you just a little bit of some of the writings of Thomas Jefferson when he wrote the Kentucky Resolutions that was dealing specifically with this act as it was implemented for the first time in this country. But let me give a little more of the history of the Alien and Sedition Acts. In the Revolutionary War, when the colonies fought against Great Britain, and we finally won that war, that after the war was over, the British still claimed that we owed a lot of debts to the British. And as a result of that, one of our secretaries of state, under President Adams, went to England and signed a treaty with Great Britain saying that we would pay reparations of war to the British. This was Secretary of State Jay that went to Great Britain. Also realized that during that war, the French had helped the colonies in their fight against Great Britain. But because of the fact that we had signed a treaty of reparations with Great Britain called the Jay Treaty, that when the French became aware of this, they were very unhappy. And as a result of this, it looked as though the French and the British were going to go to war. Now realize in the very beginning of this country that there were actually a separation of the peoples in this country and their political beliefs. The northern part of the country were called the Federalists. They were the manufacturing and the industrial financial sector of the North. And this group remained pretty much allied to Great Britain, even though we fought a revolutionary war against them. But the Southerners, the Jefferson bunch and the Southern peoples were allied more closely with France. And because of this, it began to create a dilemma that Adams was a Federalist, and because Jay had went over and signed this declaration or this treaty with Great Britain, agreeing that we would pay the reparations of war, it caused animosity between France and Great Britain, and also caused animosity between the North and the South. But because of the fact that the Federalists, the Northerners, had political control and of the Congress at the time, once it looked like France and Great Britain were going to go to war, that our Congress passed what was called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And what these acts said, amongst other things, was that the French were enemies of the United States, and that any Frenchman that was doing business within the United States was an enemy, and that the President would have total control over those transactions. He also went so far as to say that anybody who gave aid to support to a Frenchman was also an enemy of the United States. So you see, because of this Alien and Sedition Acts, that many of the Southerners were made the same as enemies of the United States and were placed under the executive war powers that was happening under this pretense of war between France and Great Britain. So you see that early on in this country, in fact, immediately almost upon the signing of the Constitution, we had these same acts that were essentially called the Trading with the Enemy Acts. And that these acts said anybody that was allied with an enemy or in any way could become identified with an enemy, that the president under the war powers had total authoritarian control over these peoples. And that he could write criminal statutes to define what the enemies can do, and that if these people violated these statutes in any case whatsoever, they could be punished criminally under these acts. It was because of this that we almost went to civil war almost immediately after the Constitution was signed. And within that in mind, I want to read a little bit to the listeners here tonight so that you can understand a little bit better. And I'm going to read the Kentucky Resolutions. They were written in November of 1798. These were written by Thomas Jefferson himself. So let me read just a little bit from these resolutions, and I think it will help to understand some of the things we're talking about here. This says, resolved, that the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government, but that by a compact under the style and title of a Constitution for the United States and the amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for special purposes, delegated to that government certain definite powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right to their own self-government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force, that to this compact each state acceded as a state, and is an integral party, its co-states forming as to itself the other party, that the government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself, since that would have made its discretion and not the Constitution the measure of its powers, but that is in all other cases of compact among powers having no common judge, each party has an equal right to judge for itself, as well as infractions, as of the mode and the measure of redress. Then resolve number 2, that the Constitution for the United States, having delegated to Congress a power to punish treason, a power to punish counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States, the power to punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas, and the powers to punish offenses against the laws of nations, and no other crimes whatsoever. And it being true as a general principle, and one of the amendments to the Constitution having also declared that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And therefore the acts of Congress passed on the 14th day of July of 1798, entitled an act in addition to an act entitled an act for the punishment of certain crimes against the United States, and also an act to punish frauds committed on the Bank of the United States, and all other acts of which assume to create, define, and punish crimes other than those so enumerated in the Constitution, are altogether void and of no force, and that the power to create, define, and punish such other crimes is reserved and of right appertains solely and exclusively to the respective states, each within its own territory. Now let's go back and analyze just a little bit of what those Kentucky resolutions said. That the historical basis Hello, Gene? Gene, are you there? Yes, my phone got cut off there for just a moment. Okay, Pete, are we still on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm back again.
Okay.
Now let's start over. Okay, the Kentucky resolutions were written by the state of Kentucky. They were written actually by Thomas Jefferson, but the state of Kentucky approved these resolutions. And basically they were written because the federal government had passed these Alien and Sedition Acts, and they had defined crimes against the United States, federal crimes that were being punished and implemented by the executive branch of the federal government. And these crimes that had been identified and proclaimed by the federal government were not the four crimes that were identified in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Because you see in Article 1, Section 8, every criminal power that was given to the federal government is defined there in Article 1, Section 8. And the 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people respectively. So this is what Jefferson and the state of Kentucky was talking about when they wrote these resolutions. They said that the federal government only has four criminal powers, and those are: 1, the power to punish treason; 2, counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States; 3, piracies and felonies committed on the high seas; and 4, offenses against the laws of nations. And they have no other criminal power whatsoever under the Constitution. And so, therefore, when they implemented these other crimes, like the crimes that would make it a crime to give aid to a Frenchman, or a crime to trade with a Frenchman, or a crime to create license on how we were going to conduct this kind of trade, or crimes that would define frauds against the National Bank of the United States, or on and on at that time, these criminal acts, Jefferson and the state of Kentucky in these resolutions, and remember Jefferson was the one that wrote the Bill of Rights. And he wrote these resolutions saying that under no conditions, even during times of pretended war, could the United States assume criminal jurisdiction powers that were not given it by the Constitution, and that any criminal power that they attempted to take, other than those specifically given in the Constitution, were totally outside the scope of the Constitution and therefore were utterly null and void and could have no effect. And then he went on and said that as in any contract or compact between powers under the laws of nations, that each party has a right, because of the fact that there's no other higher power to be a judge of what's right or what's wrong, that each party has the right to judge for itself what the Constitution says or what it doesn't say. And he went ahead and said that certainly the federal government could not be the one to make a judgment on whether or not the acts were constitutional, because he said that if the federal government could make the judgment, then it would be purely at its discretion, and that the Constitution would have no limiting effect. Because if that were the case, the federal government could do whatever it wanted to do, and then sit as its own judge and say, we have every authority to do it. Now, as we all know, that begins to sound very similar to what it is we're dealing with today. And in fact, it is absolutely the case that if we see any federal criminal statute that makes it a federal crime to do anything that is not, number 1, treason, it's not counterfeiting the securities or current coins of the United States, it's not dealing with piracies and felonies committed on the high seas, or offenses against the laws of nations, then this is a federal crime that is being instituted under the Trading with the Enemy Act as amended on March the 9th of 1933. Now that's critically important for all of us and all of our listeners to understand that. We'll say it one more time, that there are only 4 crimes that are identified as federal crimes in the Constitution, those being the 4 that we just read, and that any federal crime that is outside the scope of those four crimes are totally outside the authority of the Constitution and are being implemented under the Trading with the Enemy Act of March the 9th of 1933. Now, to carry that just a little bit further, and I think we'll use some examples here so that hopefully it will help all of us to understand this just a little bit better. In order to do that, I'm going to go now to May the 18th of 1934. And remember that on March the 9th of 1933, the federal government declared a national emergency. And in that declaration of national emergency, there at 48 Statute 1 on March 9th of 1933, the Trading with the Enemy Act was amended so that this act did not just apply to transactions of enemies within the United States, but now it applied to all transactions of all people within the United States. And under that authority, the President was given the power to issue any executive order that he wished. And those executive orders would be automatically approved and confirmed by the Congress of the United States. In fact, that law is now permanently codified at Title 12 U.S.C. Section 95B. But under these authorities, this executive power, this broad executive power to wage war was given to the President. And on May the 18th of 1934, the President of the United States issues a message to the Senate on the menace of the uncontrolled manufacture of arms and munitions. And in this message, I'm reading from Roosevelt's papers, that Roosevelt writes to the Senate of the United States saying that we have to have a power to create crimes against certain federal or certain acts. And including in these are certain acts of firearms, machine guns, sawed-off shotguns, and so on and so forth. I'll read about those in just a little bit. But also on May the 18th of 1934, in Roosevelt's papers, he also makes a statement on signing a bill to help the federal government wage war on crime and gangsters. So on May the 18th of 1934, under the executive power of the war powers, the President declared war on crime. And it was under this war on crime that I will read some of the federal statutes that now came in and begin to come into the states, identifying these new list of federal crimes. And I'll just read some of these. Number one is an amendment to the federal kidnapping statute to provide for the death penalty in the event of the injury of the victim. So here we see a federal statute making kidnapping a federal crime. Next is an act punishing the transmission of extortion threats in any form of interstate communication. Now we see a criminal statute, a federal criminal statute, making it a federal crime for the transmission of extortion threats. 3 is a statute making it a federal offense for a person to flee from one state to another to avoid prosecution of certain felonies. So here we see the federal crimes now of fleeing from one state to another or crossing a state line. A statute punishing the transportation and receipt of stolen goods, so that any person who is convicted or has stolen goods and crosses the state line, that's now a federal crime. An act punishing robbery of national banks is now a federal crime. That was the same one that the Kentucky resolutions were written about, or one of the crimes that were written about there in 1798 under the Alien and Sedition Acts. But now listen closely. A statute requiring registration of all machine guns and sawed-off shotguns and rifles. Here we see that it's now a federal crime if we do not register machine guns and sawed-off shotguns. Now let me say this to all the listeners. If we go to Ruby Ridge, we see that incident occurred because of a alleged sawed-off shotgun that was a quarter-inch, supposedly too short to meet or to fall under the federal regulations and the federal criminal statutes. Also, if we go to Waco, we see that in the beginning, those people were being investigated and charged because they allegedly had some machine gun parts or machine guns that were there that were not registered. You see that both of those federal crimes originated from the war on crime under the war powers of 1933 and were implemented in May of 1934. Also, a statute and an act making it a federal offense to assault a federal officer. Make this a federal crime now. An act authorizing agents of the Department of Justice to carry firearms. So here we see the federal criminal police power coming now within the states, all under the war on crime. An act authorizing agents of the Department of Justice to carry firearms. An act to protect certain types of trade and commerce against intimidation and racketeering. Various statutes for improving the outworn and archaic federal criminal procedures. So here we've seen the statutes that begin to be passed to allow for the federal jurisdiction, the federal criminal jurisdiction to come within the states. But also very important is a statute granting congressional consent to any two or more states to enter into agreements or compacts for the prevention of crime. Now let me read that one again. It's a statute granting congressional consent to any two or more states to enter into agreements or compacts for the prevention of crime. Now this whole thing, this whole war on crime, and this whole federal criminal jurisdiction is critically important under the war powers. Because you see that many of the people across the country realize that the people and the states are being treated as if they were regions or territories of the federal government. It's almost as though they were corporations of the District of Columbia, or they were the same as the District of Columbia, because the federal government can simply write statutes or criminal statutes or hold people to crimes for almost any reason now, whether it be for violation of a Clean Air Act or violation of an Environmental Protection Act or a violation of a OSHA or we could go on and on with hundreds and hundreds now of various criminal statutes, federal criminal statutes that are being used to restrict the people of this country within the states. And we know that under the Constitution, just as Jefferson said in the Kentucky Resolutions, there are only 4 federal criminal things that the federal government can do. Those we talked about earlier. But yet we see now under the war powers and the war on crimes beginning of a list to define many, many federal crimes and making it now possible for the federal agents to carry the firearms and act as the federal police power to enforce these criminal statutes. So it's now important to understand the interstate compact agreements and the interstate compact acts. If we go to those acts, we have to go to June the 6th of 1934. And we also have to go to our Constitution at Article 1, Section 10. Now, Article 1, Section 10 of our Constitution says that no state, this is the prohibition against the states. And I don't have a copy of the Constitution right here in front of me, but I know pretty close to exactly what it says word for word. Just a minute. Let me get a copy of this Constitution out, and I'll just read it word for word so we don't misquote anything. Now, let me look.
Okay, Gene.
Yes.
Could we do that after the break?
Yes, are we ready for a break?
Sure are.
Okay, let's do the break, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at these interstate compacts and how this thing all ties together.
Okay.
Very good.
All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, there's a loud knock on your door. Hey, honey. Something's not right.
I'm from the IRS with a power to tax. If you've got a complaint, send us a fax.
founder of the Ku Klux Klan, engineer of the Masonic Master Plan. Pike said Lucifer is God across his left, and Putin saying take the mark in your right hand. So we're all dancing with the drums of uproar right, Clinton's preparing us for another huge act. Inflation creates a panic and rape the nation. Crisis creates incite black and white programs agitation.
Okay, folks. The other time, ladies and gentlemen, is sponsored by Swiss America Trading. Here in the very near future, you will need the services of Swiss America Trading or someone that deals in real money, gold and silver coin. Swiss America Trading will be glad to help you set up a portfolio with their fast and courteous service. They'll help you no matter how much you have to spend. So call Swiss America Trading at 1-800-289-2646. You and your loved ones will be glad that you did, because in the future, the funny green money won't be worth anything, and you'll be stuck in the cold. So the number, once again, folks, 1-800-289-2646. And just call them and thank them for sponsoring the Hour of the Time, because without them, you wouldn't be hearing the truth.
Taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and their warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've extorted your jobs and surrendered our arms. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. The Illuminati wants you to be a slave from birth to grave. The banksters own the Federal Reserve. It's private. They own it. It's neither federal nor a reserve. The cashiers make that fiat funny money stuff you call dollars for 2 pennies. They lend it back to us at full face value. Then charge you interest. You get the debt. They get the interest. They get the gold. You get the gold.
And we're back, folks, with Dr. Gene Schroeder.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's proceed on just a little bit more, speaking about now the war powers, the war on crime, and the federal criminal jurisdiction that comes into this country, and how they used and what the government used as a pretense to bring it in. Let's go to Article 1, Section 10 of our Constitution. This is the prohibitions against the states. And it says that no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation. And it goes on and says no state shall make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payment of debts. We all know that obviously that is not in effect today. But let's read on. It says no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty or tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in times of peace. Obviously, that's not in effect because we have troops all over the country. But it also says no state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with another state unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. So again we see under our Constitution the exceptionary clause that would come into effect if we were in fact actually invaded or we were in such imminent danger as would not admit of delay. Now we also got to realize that on March the 4th of 1933, when President Roosevelt was inaugurated President of the United States, in his inaugural address he said he would ask for the war powers that would be given to him that would be just as great as if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. And in fact, on March the 9th of 1933 at 48 Statute 1, Congress delegated to the President those powers under that Trading with the Enemy Act, or what were previously called the Alien and Sedition Acts. But here we see that if we're actually invaded, and with the consent of Congress, states can now enter into compacts with other states. If we go back now to this war on crime, and we see one of the federal statutes that was granted to do this was the authority from Congress for states to enter into compacts for the prevention of crime and for other purposes. As a result, the states began to enter into interstate compacts, all under the authority of the federal government. So you see that once the states entered into compacts with other states, in the beginning for the prevention of crime, and then ultimately to do anything and everything, down to and including the Uniform Motor Vehicle Safety Codes, to interstate compacts on environment, water, river basin compacts, on and on, that now completely permeates the entire federal and state governments. But anyway, once the states entered into compacts with other states, they were now no longer individual sovereign states. They were now regions made up of compacts of states under the federal statutes. They were in essence federal corporations. And once they entered into the interstate federal corporation status, then immediately the federal criminal statutes came over those states, and the federal police power came within the states, doing exactly the same thing that had happened in 1798, when those Alien and Sedition Acts were imposed by the federal government, and all those criminal statutes were passed over the states at that same point in time. Exactly the same condition. The reason that this is so critically important is because it is these very issues that caused in this country the Revolutionary War. It was this same very issue that caused the Civil War. It was this same very issue that was used in the War of 1933, which imposed this war power government over us and exists over us today. And if we cannot resolve these problems, ultimately, these are the kind of issues that cause revolutions and they cause wars. And so that is why it's so critically important that we understand these critical concepts as to how this federal government operates and what specifically that we, the American people, must do to begin to overcome that. So before we take some calls, I want to say one other thing. That is, Jefferson stated so vividly in the Kentucky Resolves that he says that the measure of its powers, but that as in all other cases of compact among powers, having no common judge, each party has an equal right to judge for itself, as well as of infractions, as of the mode and measure of redress. So you see that under the law of nations, that each party has the right to judge for itself what the right and wrong of the situation is. With that in mind, the people of this United States have petitioned the states to begin to answer these questions and to begin to try to restore the Constitution of the United States. So far, the states have not done anything significant in terms of answering these questions. The people of this United States have time and time again petitioned the Congress. They have petitioned the President. They have petitioned the courts to answer these questions and to redress the grievances that we have over this form of government that's over us. But so far, none of those institutions have done anything to even publicly come forth to attempt to answer the questions and redress the grievances. So with that in mind, there is only one party left that can now make the judgment, and that is we, the people, ourselves. That our other institutions of government at this point are dysfunctional. They are not answering the questions, and they are not attempting to resolve the crisis that we have. So with that in mind, the people of this United States have called a national common law grand jury. This common law grand jury is going to sit in Wichita, Kansas on June the 3rd and the 4th. It will convene at 8 o'clock on the 3rd, 8 o'clock in the morning. And we are asking the people from all over the nation, from all states, to come to this common law grand jury, because all of these evidences, some of which we've talked about a little bit here tonight, are going to be presented to this common law grand jury. And it is our hope that with the hard evidence and the hard facts, which we think are conclusive, that the common law grand jury is going to agree that yes, we do have gross usurpations under these war powers, under this Trading with the Enemy Act, and that the federal government has taken and assumed powers that were not delegated to it by the Constitution. And as a result, we the people are going, we hope, to issue a declaratory judgment that this form of government in this country is unlawful and outside the authority of the Constitution. If we can get that verdict from the people, then we think we can take that verdict from the common law grand jury, and we can go to any congressman, either state or federal, or we can go to the President of the United States or the government or the governor of any state, or even to the courts, whether they be state or federal, and we can lay these findings of facts and the conclusions of law in front of these public servants and say, you are operating outside the authorities of the Constitution. The people have spoken. And we think that this common law grand jury, if we can get the verdict, can take us a long ways in the beginning of a first step to begin to restore legitimate constitutional government in this country. We think it's a critical endeavor, and certainly we're asking everyone, all the listeners out there tonight, that if there's any possible way that anyone can come or help support someone else to come, please come to this common law grand jury. And now, with that in mind, I want to read the complaint that was served upon Bill Clinton and Janet Reno. And then after that, maybe we can take some call-ins and we'll take a few questions. But let me read the complaint. It says, the people in and for the United States of America, ex rel, hereby declare that there has been gross usurpations of our national Constitution and Bill of Rights. Under pretense of a continuing crisis of war and emergency conditions that have existed since the Civil War and continue to exist in times of peace to the present time. Senate Report 93-549 says that since March the 9th of 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. Title 12 U.S.C. Section 95B says that every order issued by the President since March the 4th of 1933 or any order issued in the future is automatically approved and confirmed. These powers being conferred under the authority of the Act of October the 6th, 1917 as amended March the 9th of 1933 are strictly a war power. This decided as Storer v. Wallace, United States Supreme Court. That this vast range of powers taken together confers enough authority to rule this country without reference to the normal constitutional processes. Wherefore, the people in and for the United States of America hereby demand that the President Bill Clinton and the Attorney General Janet Reno show cause within 60 days why these unlawful powers being perpetrated against the American people should not be terminated. And if they should fail to show cause, then our court, with original jurisdiction, is to issue a declaratory judgment in favor of the American people, and any and all remedy it finds proper against the above-named defendants. Dated this day of April, 1995. This was served upon Bill Clinton and Janet Reno, is now being published in the Washington Times so that all public servants can read this demand. It's with that background and with that premise in mind that we have called for the common law grand jury, the court of last resort. As of no other court in this nation, whether they be state courts or federal courts, have been willing to hear the evidence and the facts, we are now going to try this in the court of public opinion in front of the national grand jury of the American people. If we can get the finding of the facts and the laws that we think we're going to get, we think it'll be a critical first step in beginning to bring all of these issues to light and beginning to work towards the resolution and the restoration of the Constitution of this United States. So with that in mind, if we have anyone who would like to call in, please call in. We'll take some calls and try to answer any questions.
Gene, we won't be able to take call-ins.
Okay, so there'll be no call-ins tonight. Okay, how much longer do we have, Pete?
We got 15 minutes.
Okay, well, with that in mind, I covered basically everything that I was kind of wanting to cover here tonight, but let's just go ahead and we'll talk about anything or whatever. Pete, have you got anything you want to talk about?
I think you pretty much covered everything.
Well, we could go on and we could talk more about the Alien and Sedition Acts, and I think it's always important, if all of us go back and look a little bit at history, because I think by understanding some of the things that happened in history, we can so much better understand some of the things that are happening today. And if we go back to these Kentucky resolutions again, where this thing is where Roosevelt or Jefferson talked about this so explicitly, that the only federal criminal jurisdiction that exists are these four powers. The powers to punish treason, the powers to punish the counterfeiting of the securities of the United States, the powers to punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas, and the power to punish offenses against the laws of nations. And those are the only four criminal jurisdictions that can exist in this country. But yet, we see today, we see Congress and the President issuing executive orders, and let's just take a look at some of those. And I haven't made a list, but let's just think. Number one, we know that if we fail to file a 1040 form, that's called a federal crime. It's called a willful failure to file. Where in the Constitution do we find any federal criminal power to punish willful failure to file? It does not exist, does it? The only place this willful failure to file exists is at Section 2 of 48 Statute 1 of March the 9th of 1933. Let me just read this. 48 Statute 1, Section 2, subsection B. It says that subsection B of Section 5 of the Act of October the 6th, 1917 is amended, is hereby amended to read as follows. And it says that during times of war or during any other period of national emergency declared by the President, that the President may, through any agency that he may designate or otherwise, investigate, regulate, or prohibit under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe, by means of license or otherwise, any transactions in foreign exchange, transfers of credit between or payments by banking institutions as defined by the President, and the export, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency by any person within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So here it says that the President has total authoritarian power over any transaction that any person within this United States makes. But then it goes on and says that the President may require any person engaged in any transaction referred to in this subdivision to furnish under oath complete information relative thereto, including the production of any books of account, contracts, letters, or other papers in connection therewith in the custody or control of such person, either before or after such transaction is completed. And whoever willfully violates any of the provisions of this subdivision or of any license, order, rule, or regulation issued thereunder shall upon conviction be fined not more than $10,000, nor be imprisoned for more than 10 years. So here you see one criminal statute, willful failure to file. certainly not under the Constitution, explicitly forbidden by the Constitution, but being implemented at 48 Statute 1, March the 9th of 1933, under the Trading with the Enemy Act. That being only one. We could go to May the 18th, and we could look at all the federal criminal statutes that we read about earlier, including restoration of guns, sawed-off shotguns, federal kidnapping statutes, federal statutes against the national banks, and we can go on and on down that list, including the statute for the states to enter into the interstate compacts, therefore obliterating the individual states and the sovereignty of the states and forming these states into corporations of the federal government as federal corporations under the Act of June the 6th of 1934 as 501c3 corporations. So then, we can see those federal criminal statutes coming in. Then we can take them forward on into this date where we see now then you can be charged with a federal crime for not having let's say a CDL, a federal driver's license if you try to drive a truck down the road. We see federal crimes concerning maybe trying to build a pond or a stream, or a federal crime for digging in a wetland or trying to cover up an area that might be considered a wetland. Or we can even see federal crimes if you go out and plant too much wheat on your land. And we've seen those cases happen several years ago and still happen to this day. That the federal government has now permeated the entire social and economic agenda of this country. There are no such things as, according to the federal government, under this type of government, as individual sovereign states. And certainly no such thing as individual sovereign citizens, again, according to our government, under this Trading with the Enemy Act, under this war that was declared on March the 9th of 1933. So therefore, it's very critically important that the people and the listeners of this radio program here of Bill's understand some of these fundamental concepts. And I hope that tonight that we've talked pretty technically, I guess, about some of this information, and maybe even somewhat academically. And it may be a little bit difficult for a lot of the listeners to follow and comprehend some of the things we were talking about here. But it's really important, and let me put in a little bit of a plug for myself. We have written a book over this subject. We've tried to write it real simple, and yet use the government documentation to prove the case and simply show what the government's had to say. That book is entitled Constitution, Fact or Fiction. And if anyone would like a copy of that book, I'll give you an 800 number that you can call. It's 1-800-610-4908. I'll give that number one more time. It's 1-800-610-4908. And also, I want to put in a plug for Bill. Bill couldn't be on the program tonight, and I hope that all of his listeners have been able to bear with us tonight, because I'm not the host that Bill is. Certainly probably not near as entertaining also. But also I know that Bill has worked hard, and I know that Bill has a newspaper that he's now publishing. And Pete, would you like to say something about the newspaper?
We will be going to press this Friday, and we will be getting those sent out. And we're burning midnight oil to get this paper out for you guys.
Okay, if you got an address for anyone that would like to subscribe, where they can call in or subscribe to the newspaper, Bill or Pete?
I sure do.
Why don't we go ahead and give that?
The address for Veritas is P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona 85936. The address, once again, is to Veritas, P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona 85936. And if you have any questions or comments, you can call them at 520-337-2878. And Dr. Gene Schroeder, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Hour of the Time. It's been a great pleasure.
It's certainly been my pleasure. Let me give one other phone number if anyone would like to contact us personally to discuss any of these issues or to discuss the common law grand jury that's been called for Wichita. Let me give a phone number that they could also call and an address they could write to if they would like. The phone number would be for the American Agriculture Movement. That phone number is 719-787-9958. I'll repeat it one more time. 719-787-9958. Also, if they would like to write, and then we can try to answer, and always do try to answer all of our letters, they can write to the American Agriculture Movement. That's just AAM, Box 130, Campo, CAMPO, Colorado, 81029. I'll repeat that one more time. It's AAM, Box 130, Campo, Colorado, 81029. So if anyone would like to contact us personally to discuss any of these issues, certainly they can call that phone number or write to that address.
Okay, well, that should wrap this show up for tonight.
Okay, Pete. Well, I've certainly enjoyed it. I hope we haven't been too boring to all the listeners. This is our first to sit here and try to host a program. We've been a guest on many programs, but certainly the first time we've ever done a program of this nature. So I hope it's been enjoyable, and I hope our listeners have all got a little more insight into some of the things that we're studying and some of the things we need to understand as we try to begin to approach the resolution of the crisis we have in this country and the restoration of our legitimate, normal, constitutional government. So with that in mind, I'll say good night and good luck to all the listeners.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Pete.
Good night, and God bless you all, folks.
Listening to the Hour of the Time with Bill Cooper. Why today? They want to hear from you. Write Kaji, C-A-J-I, Box 1420, Sholo, that's spelled S-H-O-W-L-O-W, Arizona 85901. Again, Kaji, Box 1420, Sholo, AZ 85901, USA. You can call the Research Center as well. Their new number, 602-337-2562. Again, 602-337-2562. And listen for the Hour of the Time with Bill Cooper, Monday through Friday, right here on WWCR. WWCR, Nashville, Tennessee, USA.